Okay, we're going to start with a quick little introduction and move further into FreecoiL and FreecoiL development. So, first up I have FreecoiL. I'm going to open it up in Godot. First thing that opens up is the container. This is a scene, like I said with Godot. It has multiple nodes. The base node is literally a node. And then there are multiple scenes within. And within that, we have scene 1, scene 0. And what these are two container scene nodes for all the rest of the scenes. So Godot has a root node, which is above this, you can't see it. And then I load in container. And then container loads in another scene. The way it does that, it's code in here that basically goes to our splash screen timer. So on splash screen timer gets loaded in. Sorry, that's loading the main menu. Right here on splash screen timer timeout. There we go. There's the resource. It preloads the splash screen, and then after that, it loads in the main menu. And the reason these are both here is basically so that we can transition. And so long as we have the container, Godot won't seem to freeze on the top level, because the standard way that they will teach you is to basically transition from one scene to the next. So you just load out your next scene. But in doing that, I found that basically the interface could freeze, especially if it's a large scene, like my main menu, which I'll get to in one sec. First we'll load the splash screen. It's super basic. Make sure all my stuff is set right. Okay, so in the splash screen, if we go to 2D, it just looks like that. It is that first screen that you see. One other handy thing that this actually does is it takes a screenshot of itself if the development mode is set right, and then makes that the first image that pops up on the phone. You will notice that I have scaling enabled. If you have a smaller phone or resolution with an odd, or a phone with an odd resolution, the game may appear a little smaller or a little bigger on your phone. That's just due to settings that I have for the project, but we'll get to that quite yet. So super simple splash screen. This gets loaded into container on scene 0, and it is a center container, which basically is going to center things up in the top part here as part of the golden third rule, as recommended by Asgaron. And then we have a vertical container. Sorry, couldn't think of that for a second. A 9-patch rect, which basically just has the image. A second one for the other, and a horizontal container with my label, which is independent of the version number that gets put in there. And it just pulls up that version number as a tool, which means it does it even when the editor is open. So it knows what version it's on. It's helpful for me, so that way I always have the correct version. We'll see more of that tool thing in a sec. In the container, it has a few useful things. One is the camera. So there's the camera, which gets moved around looking at different areas. It's a camera that's basically going to see the default screen width, which is going to be 540 by 960. And then we move that around in larger scenes to be able to look at other menus. All right? And again, I do this just for speed and so that the device doesn't seem to go frozen for a bit while it's loading stuff. We have someone who tuned in. That's Erickson. Alright. After we load that, we're going to go ahead and load the main menu, and that's what the container does automatically next, which is this bottom part down here. Goes to, on a timer, the main menu. When it loads it in, I have a bunch of fancy code in here. It's nothing too fancy, but basically it does this threaded loading in the background, again, so that way we don't lock up the main screen, and we can have a smooth transition between the two. The Other things that you don't see besides the container that are also going on, they're kind of a big deal. If we go to project settings, in auto load, you can see we have these auto loads. What auto loads are is Godot's version of a singleton that is global. So it gets loaded into the root scene, again a scene that you can't see, that's at the very top. It's even above container, and these get loaded before everything else. So it has a benefit, that is that they get to execute before everything else, so you know that they're there when you load in your other scenes. Helpers loads in first because settings actually uses it. Helpers is just a whole bunch of useful little functions they couldn't really classify as anything else, so I put them in there. Settings is a big deal. We'll come back to that in just one sec. And FreecoiL interface. So FreecoiL interface is just the interface that is GDScript that talks to the Kotlin side. Currently Kotlin, was previously Java. Doesn't really matter whether it's Kotlin or Java. It will talk to either of them as long as the functions are all named the way that the two expect. So FreecoiL interface, to make it very simple, this will load the plugin. That is the Kotlin plugin. Technically, Godot loads it and does that through when it gets built, which is under here, but I'll come back to it. When it gets built, we basically have a little check mark in here that throws the plugin on and loads it. It's just a very basic loading though. It doesn't actually initialize the class fully anyways. So that full initialization gets done by the FreecoiL interface. And that happens right here in ready. It basically sets up some variables, adds some children, initializes variables, some more, and then we'll go to this delayed loading. We do the delayed loading. Again, I like to delay lots of things that aren't necessary so that the UI will get up in front of you as fast as possible. I could definitely do better at that, but I've done pretty good so far. Definitely could use some improvement with the main menu now, but we'll get back to that. On delay loading, it checks, do we have the singleton FreecoiL? Alright. If we don't, like for instance, when I run this right now, we do not have the singleton FreecoiL. I had my version tag, basically version tag will put a star up in here if there is, if the plugin is loaded or the engine has that singleton. But it's not in this class, and it's not when it's on Linux because that's an Android only feature. If it is, it will go ahead and make sure it's got it, assign it the variable, do the hello, and then do the initialization. And then everything else follows on. You have to follow along in the code, but basically it goes through the process of making sure that you have Bluetooth permissions and location permissions, and then testing out the Bluetooth interface to make sure it's up, testing out the location to make sure that it's actually working. It goes through all that process. And it's also, obviously once it's all up, it's what connects to the gun and talks to the gun. And all the functions that talk directly to the gun are through here. That aren't the Kotlin side. So again, this is the Godot side of things. In settings, which is not currently, yeah it is. Okay, settings is a big deal. This was something I wrote earlier on for one of my other games. Needed a way to store a bunch of variables. I started to realize that they really should be separated out. So you would have like testing variables. You have preferences, in-game, session, and network. And this was not in the first version of FreecoiL that I released. It just didn't have these features, and these features made a big deal. I actually worked on it, like I said, in a separate game. The big thing was the networked variables. What's beautiful about these is they get passed over the network, which means that if the host has them, then everybody else gets them too, which is awesome. You could read through this. It's pretty cool what it does. Basically just creates these classes, stores the settings, and the cool thing is when you store settings with set data, it creates a signal for each and every single one of them and assigns it. So anytime it needs to get updated, it'll emit this signal. And so if you get data, that doesn't do anything, but if you set data, it will emit the signal. Come back to that. Register data is basically the same thing as set data, but register data should be called before and the first time. But I think set data will go all the way through and do it if you haven't. do the registration. That is. Monitor data, this is how we subscribe to that signal. So if we want to see any time a piece of data and settings changes, we just use monitor data. And I'll show you an example of that later on. It has the ability to save it to file. It uses a deferred save with a thread. So again, it doesn't slow anything down. It all goes in the background. We do it when we have time. And it also cleans up its own threads. It can load settings from your phone. So if you're just reloading and reinstalling the app as we upgrade, it will load your old settings. Yeah, there's not a lot of features in there yet, but we've got plans for it and we have the ability to do it. It will be a big part of working with the maps and stuff. So that stuff is coming. Sync peer is the function that goes ahead and pushes it over the network. That's the beauty of it, is it knows that it's a sync var, as it's called on the other side, and it will push it through the network. Network code is its own code file under code, networking, and then the network node.gd. GD, the scene is just a scene. It used to all be packed into the scene, but I separated it out. Again, that will sync the variables across the network. And we can do that with more than just networking vars. All of these down here are all of our signals. I have to pre-create them all, but then I assign them as I need them. We have 255 available, 256 total, but the first one's always reserved. So, and we actually reserve about 4 or 5 of them, really. That's just for setting up settings. And then everything else thereafter is a signal that is available for any kind of settings as they come in and as you save them. The main menu looks like a beast. It's really not that bad. All my scenes, I tried to keep them organized. There are a lot of old scenes when I had more scenes, so I apologize for that. I'll be working on getting rid of some of the junk when I'm not so busy adding features. There's a bunch of scenes that are basically dead code in here, but luckily they're all pretty lightweight. It's just text files, so not taking up a lot of space overall. We load up main menu, and with the main menu loaded, it is actually, like I said, a whole bunch of these. These red boxes are just references so that I know which one's which. I label them by their XY offset, and I label them as a whole screen jump. And then the container knows how to move the camera according to whole screen jumps. And like I said, it looks like a beast, and there's a lot of stuff in here. It's quite deep. I plan on sorting this out and having it only load what's really necessary as you're moving along, but preload a little bit. So I've got to make that smart. Haven't done it yet. It still works even on my pretty crappy old phone, so not really concerned about memory. Godot seems to be doing a good job managing all that and only really loading things as they come to the screen, but they're loaded in memory in a way, so still works quick. With each of these, I have scenes within scenes, as I kind of talked about on the first one. That's a good example of that. This is a test scene, and then it has within it, it has another scene that is the header. So if we click on that, that will open. All these are scenes within scenes. They all get their style from the main menu scene, which has its own style applied to it. So that's why this one doesn't look like the others, because it's missing that. The test knows that it has its own theme loaded, and that's basically right here. Just reassign the theme twice, so that way I could tell that everything was loaded correctly and looks correct. So that when I load into main menu, it looks good. And that scene is actually loaded in the background, which is something I recently added. Loading portions of scenes or other resources in the background. That one gets done. Not through this menu. I'm actually in the wrong script. So it's not that one. But it does get loaded in the background. When I'm not under pressure of trying to think all those things through and think in advance, I'll be able to navigate that mentally better. So basically, you get presented initially with this Start Network game. When you click that, it's a button in the scene. I've embedded a whole bunch of scripts in the scene. That's why it shows the script file here, but then says it's part of main menu scene and then colon 14. Basically, rather than being a separate GD script, we expand down here, it's part of this file, so it all gets built in. I'll show you what that looks like in text in a sec. But I can still see it individually and edit it. And when you click it, it has an on button pressed too. Tells it to go ahead and make it a networked game and save that data real quick. And then calls the group container, which is back to the container. And in the container call, it says column X menu. And it gives the XY offset. Okay. What that triggers then is us to jump to 0, 1, which is right down here. So 1 down in the Y direction. And then it'll ask you if you want to be a host or client. All these things, again, it's the same thing with the button. We basically repeat this process and keep jumping around in the menus. Pretty simple. I try to keep it that way. There are some gotchas with different things, particularly, let me put that back. Let me show you the call sign. So if we need to ask you for your call sign, okay, I go in here. You have to navigate this thing and try to find them, but you can click on one and then you can easily find where it is. In here, we have a login player audio, which is just a node, and call sign line edit. When this gets ready, if we don't have the player name, then what happens is it yields for 1 frame, just to give GoDaddy a chance to load. Then it will see if the audio is playing. If not, which most likely isn't, it's going to go ahead and, with the background resource loader, start this helper, which is a threaded background loader, to load the login wave. That allows us to get to the screen faster and then load the sound after, so that we still have time for our FreecoiL plugin to load up and everything else. Because we've got a lot when the app first starts. And we want to give all that time and make it smooth. So then the login starts up. Once it starts up, it listens. So it has this settings.session.connect to settings.session.monitor data. And what it's monitoring is helpers background load result. When this gets updated by the helpers code, which it only updates when it says, okay, we loaded that result for you, then I want you to call on me, self, okay? So on this script, I want you to, really on this node, right here. So that is this node. On that node, go ahead and call on the self, call this function, player audio background, audio from background, which is this function here, which is going to get that result. From the results, it's going to break out its thread number and go ahead and assign that as the stream and then play the file. So all that again in the background. I'm going to go ahead and pause for a minute and see if someone has questions. So I'm going to pause my stream too.